I stood at the back of the Crystal Pavilion ballroom, watching my husband take the stage at his promotion gala. "I want to thank the woman who truly deserves this," Gideon said into the microphone, pulling his secretary Alicia forward. "None of this would be possible without her." The applause was deafening. What nobody knew, including him, was that I owned the building they were standing in. And what I did next would make this the last event he ever hosted. I arrived at the Crystal Pavilion at 6:47 p.m. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Fashionably late but not scandalously so. The kind of timing that suggested confidence rather than desperation. My emerald dress, the one Gideon had called too much when I'd shown it to him last week, caught the light from the 12 crystal chandeliers I'd personally selected when I renovated this space 3 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. This building, this entire venue, belonged to me through a family trust my grandmother had established before she passed. Gideon didn't know. We'd kept finances separate per the prenup his mother had insisted on, and I'd never felt the need to announce every asset I held. The Crystal Pavilion was my insurance policy, my quiet investment in Denver's booming event industry, managed through my maiden name, Meredith Ashby, not Meredith Rudd. The ballroom buzzed with exactly the kind of energy Gideon loved. 200 of Denver's tech elite, dressed in their expensive casual wear, sipping champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's car payments. I'd planned events like this 100 times in my role as senior event coordinator at Nexus Strategic, the same company where Gideon had just been promoted to Chief Innovation Officer. I spotted him immediately. Center of attention, naturally. His navy suit was new, I'd never seen it before. That should have been my first clue. The second was Alicia Dawson standing beside him, wearing a silver dress that complemented his tie perfectly. Coordinated. Intentional. Alicia had been his executive assistant for 8 months. Young, eager, efficient in that way that made everyone assume she was just extraordinarily good at her job. She probably was. But as I watched her laugh at something Gideon said, her hand resting casually on his forearm, I realized I'd been blind to something happening right in front of me. Meredith. Carrie Jonas appeared at my elbow, my closest friend at Nexus and one of the few people who knew what tonight was supposed to mean. "You look stunning. Is that the Marchesa?" "Close. It's a vintage piece I found in Cherry Creek." I accepted a champagne flute from a passing server, one of my servers, technically, though they didn't know I was anything other than a guest. "Has it started yet?" "Just about to. Gideon's been holding court for the past 20 minutes. Carrie's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you okay?" "You seem." "I'm fine." I wasn't fine. For 3 months, I'd been working on the proposal that was supposed to secure my own promotion to Director of Strategic Events. I'd landed the Meridian Tech account, a $4.3 million contract for their annual conference series. I'd restructured our entire vendor network, saving the company $890,000 annually. I'd personally managed 18 high-profile events without a single client complaint. And 2 weeks ago, Gideon had come home and told me the promotion committee wanted to wait another quarter before making any decisions about my advancement. He'd said it kindly, sympathetically, as if he hadn't been on that committee himself. As if he hadn't had any influence over the decision. The lights dimmed. Someone tapped a microphone. Hugh Mills, the CEO of Nexus Strategic, took the stage with the kind of gravitas that only a man who'd built a company from nothing could carry. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this beautiful venue," he gestured around the ballroom I'd painstakingly restored, to celebrate an exceptional promotion. Gideon Rudd has been with Nexus for 7 years, and in that time, he's transformed our innovation division from a modest department into a powerhouse that's generated over $60 million in new revenue. The applause swelled. I clapped along, the champagne flute cold against my palm. But Gideon didn't do it alone, Hugh continued. "Success at this level requires partnership, dedication, and the support of extraordinary people. Gideon, would you like to say a few words?" My husband bounded onto the stage with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever, all charm and confidence. He shook Hugh's hand, adjusted the microphone, and surveyed the room with that smile that had made me fall in love with him 9 years ago at a conference in Vale. Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, everyone. His eyes scanned the crowd, passing over me without recognition. This promotion means everything to me. But I need to be honest, I didn't earn this alone. There's someone who's been integral to every success, every late night, every breakthrough. Someone who deserves just as much credit as I do. My chest tightened. For one irrational moment, I thought he was going to call me up. Acknowledge the dinners I'd skipped to help him rehearse presentations. The weekends I'd spent reviewing his proposals. The connections I'd made that led to 3 of his biggest deals. Alicia Dawson, could you join me up here? The room erupted in applause as his secretary walked to the stage in her silver dress and 4-inch heels. Gideon took her hand, and pulled her to the microphone. I want to thank the woman who truly deserves this, he said, his voice carrying across 200 people who had no idea what they were witnessing. Alicia has been my right hand, my sounding board, my partner in every sense of the word. None of this would be possible without her tireless dedication, her brilliant insights, and her unwavering belief in our vision. Our vision. Not his vision. Our vision. Alicia blushed on cue, murmuring something modest into the microphone about being honored to work with such an inspiring leader. Gideon beamed at her like she'd hung the moon, and I watched my marriage disintegrate in real time under 12 crystal chandeliers I'd chosen specifically because they reminded me of stars. Carrie's hand found mine in the darkness. Meredith. I pulled away, setting my champagne flute on a nearby cocktail table with deliberate precision. The applause continued. Gideon and Alicia posed for photos. Hugh clapped them both on the back. And I walked toward the venue's back office, where the real power in this building resided. Nobody saw me leave. They were too busy celebrating. But they would see what came next. The back office of the Crystal Pavilion was quiet, insulated from the celebration happening 50 feet away. I designed it that way intentionally. Soundproofed walls, separate climate control, a space where I could think during chaotic events without being overwhelmed by noise. I sat at the mahogany desk and opened my laptop, pulling up the building's security camera feeds. 12 screens showed different angles of the ballroom. On screen 3, Gideon had his arm around Alicia's waist as they posed with Hugh Mills. Screen 7 caught them leaning close, whispering something that made them both laugh. Screen 9 showed the moment his hand brushed the small of her back, familiar, practiced, intimate. I'd installed these cameras after a theft incident 2 years ago. State-of-the-art system with cloud backup and facial recognition. Every frame was timestamped and archived automatically. I made a mental note to download tonight's footage before I did anything else. My phone buzzed. A text from Kendall, my younger sister in Boulder. How's the gala? Did Gideon give you a shout-out? Send pics. I stared at the message, trying to formulate a response that wouldn't immediately alarm her. Before I could type anything, another text arrived from Carrie. Where did you go? Are you okay? Do you need me? I typed back, in the office. Need a minute. Don't worry. Her response was immediate, I'm worried. That was brutal. She wasn't wrong. Brutal didn't quite cover it, though. Brutal suggested violence, something explosive and immediate. What I just witnessed was more insidious, a calculated erasure of my existence in my husband's professional life, performed with a smile and thunderous applause. I closed the security feeds and opened my work files instead. The Meridian Tech proposal sat at the top of my recent documents, 147 pages of strategic planning, budget projections, and creative concepts that had taken me 4 months to develop. I'd pitched it to their CMO, Samuel Jonas, in a meeting that had lasted 3 hours and ended with a handshake and a signed contract. The contract Gideon had mentioned in 3 separate team meetings as a huge win for Nexus Innovation Strategy. My innovation strategy. My vendor relationships. My 4 months of 80-hour weeks. I scrolled through my email archive, looking for something specific. Found it dated 6 weeks ago, an email from Hugh Mills to the senior leadership team about Q3 promotions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The committee has identified two strong candidates for advancement, Gideon Rudd, CIO, and Meredith Rudd, Director of Strategic Events. Both have demonstrated exceptional performance. Final decisions will be announced by September 30th. September 30th had come and gone 2 weeks ago. Gideon got his promotion. I got up, let's wait another quarter, conversation delivered by my husband in our kitchen while I made him dinner. I opened another folder, personal files I kept backed up in my work system. Inside was a spreadsheet I'd started maintaining 3 months ago, initially as a way to track my achievements for my promotion package. But it had evolved into something else when I'd started noticing inconsistencies. Row 12, the Pinnacle Insurance account. I'd secured the initial meeting through a college friend. I'd developed the entire pitch strategy. Gideon had delivered the final presentation, but only after I'd rehearsed it with him 4 times. Nexus Records listed it as Rudd Initiative, $2.1 million annual value. Row 18, the Denver Tech Summit sponsorship. I'd negotiated directly with the organizers, leveraging relationships from my 5 years running corporate events before joining Nexus. Gideon had attended the kickoff meeting. Internal documents credited Rudd Strategic Vision, $890K commitment. Row 23, the Atlas Consulting Partnership that had generated 16 new client referrals. I'd built that relationship over 2 years, starting with a cold email to their managing partner. Gideon had joined me for exactly 2 dinners. The Nexus quarterly report called it a testament to Rudd's networking excellence. 27 rows. 27 accounts, campaigns, or strategic initiatives that bore my fingerprints but his name. I'd told myself it didn't matter. We were married. His success was our success. A rising tide lifted all boats. All those corporate platitudes that made systematic erasure sound like partnership. But watching him on that stage, holding another woman's hand while thanking her for the work I'd done, that shattered whatever delusion I'd been maintaining. A knock on the office door interrupted my spiral. Meredith? It's me. I unlocked the door to find Carrie holding 2 champagne flutes and wearing an expression that suggested she'd witnessed an execution. I told the bartender these were for the venue owner. Figured that was technically true. Technically. I accepted the glass and gestured for her to sit. Did I miss anything important? Depends on your definition of important. Gideon and Alicia did a synchronized toast. Hugh announced they'll be co-leading the new AI ethics division together. And someone from Denver Business Journal asked if they were a couple. She paused. Gideon laughed it off, but he didn't exactly deny it. I took a long drink of champagne. How long do you think it's been going on? The affair? Or the credit stealing? Both. Carrie was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Remember when you were in Seattle for your father's surgery? That was 6 months ago? Gideon and Alicia went to that venture capital conference in Austin together. The one you were supposed to attend with him. I did remember. I'd apologized profusely for missing it, had felt guilty about not being there to support him during an important networking opportunity. He'd told me not to worry, that he'd manage fine, that family came first. They stayed at the same hotel, Carrie continued. I process expense reports, remember? Same hotel, separate rooms. But someone ordered room service to his suite at 2 in the morning. 2 dinners. Bottle of wine. You do the math. The champagne turned sour in my mouth. I stayed in that office for another 20 minutes, drinking champagne with Carrie while the gala continued without me. Through the security feeds, I watched Gideon work the room with Alicia at his side, introducing her to clients I'd cultivated, laughing at jokes told by executives I'd strategically seated together at events I'd planned. What are you going to do? Carrie finally asked. I don't know yet. But that was a lie. I already knew. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud. When I finally returned to the ballroom, the speeches had ended and the crowd had dispersed into smaller groups. Jazz music played from the quartet I'd hired, local musicians I discovered at a Cherry Creek art fair. The catering team circulated with appetizers from recipes I'd approved after 3 separate tasting sessions. Every detail of this event bore my mark, my aesthetic, my standards. And nobody knew. I found Gideon near the bar, surrounded by colleagues from the innovation division. Alicia stood beside him, her hand resting on his forearm again in that casual way that suggested ownership. She saw me first, and something flickered across her face. Not quite guilt, but close. Recognition, maybe. Acknowledgement that I was the wife she displaced. Meredith. Gideon turned with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Where did you disappear to? I looked for you after the speech. Just needed some air. It was a beautiful speech. I kept my voice neutral, pleasant. Very heartfelt. Wasn't it? He pulled me close for a brief side hug that felt performative. I wanted to make sure Alicia got the recognition she deserves. She's been absolutely instrumental in everything we've accomplished. Everything we've accomplished. I'm sure she has. I turned to Alicia directly. Congratulations on the co-leadership position. That's quite an achievement after only 8 months. Her smile was practiced, humble. I've had an excellent mentor. Gideon has taught me so much about strategic thinking and client relations. Strategic thinking. Client relations. The phrases I'd used in my own promotion materials, now coming out of her mouth. Well, you're lucky to have each other. I squeezed Gideon's hand once, then released it. I should make the rounds. I see some Meridian Tech people I want to say hello to. I walked away before he could respond, weaving through clusters of guests until I reached Samuel Jonas from Meridian. He stood near the windows overlooking downtown Denver, nursing what looked like whiskey rather than champagne. Meredith. He greeted me with a genuine smile. Hell of an event. Your team really delivered. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. I paused. How are you feeling about the fall conference series? Everything's still on track? Absolutely. Though I have to admit, I was surprised to see the internal communications. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails. Nexus sent over a project update last week listing Gideon Rudd as the primary contact for our account. I thought you were leading this. My stomach dropped. Can I see that email? He handed me his phone. The message was dated 5 days ago, sent from Gideon's email address with Alicia CC'd. The subject line read, Meridian Tech Partnership, Transition Update. I read the first paragraph 3 times before the words fully registered. Dear Samuel, as Nexus Strategic continues to grow, we're realigning our account management structure for optimal leadership. Effective immediately, Alicia Dawson and I will be co-managing the Meridian Tech relationship, with support from our strategic events team as needed. We're excited to build on the foundation that's been established and take this partnership to the next level. Support from our strategic events team as needed. The foundation that's been established. 4 months of work reduced to a foundation. My role demoted to support. Meredith? Samuel's voice came from far away. You okay? I handed back his phone, forcing my face into something resembling professional composure. Yes. Sorry. This is just the first I'm hearing about the transition. Corporate communication issues, you know how it is. But Samuel Jonas hadn't built a $400 million company by missing subtext. The contract has your name on it. Your proposal, your strategy, your vision. I signed it because of you, not because of Nexus's org chart. He paused. If there's something going on that affects our partnership, I need to know about it. There's nothing going on, I said automatically. Then, catching myself, actually, can we schedule a call next week? I'd like to discuss the implementation timeline in more detail. Absolutely. Have your assistant coordinate with mine. He studied my face for a moment longer. And Meredith? Whatever's happening here tonight, I've been in business long enough to recognize when someone's getting screwed. Don't let them erase your work. After he walked away, I stood at the window watching the Denver skyline while my marriage and career imploded simultaneously 50 feet behind me. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white, and I realized my hands were shaking. My phone buzzed. A text from Gideon, heading home early. Big day tomorrow. Don't wait up. I turned to scan the ballroom. He was already gone. So was Alicia. I looked at my watch, 9:47 p.m. The gala was contracted until 11 p.m., with cleanup extending until midnight. As the venue owner, I had access to every room in this building, including the security footage showing who entered and exited through every door. I pulled up the Crystal Pavilion's Master Access app on my phone and activated the parking garage cameras. Gideon's Tesla, left spot B7 at 9:44 p.m. Alicia's Audi, left spot B12 at 9:46 p.m. Both turned left onto 17th Street. I pulled up the Skyline Apartments parking garage, part of our building security network partnership. Gideon's Tesla arrived 10:02 p.m., departed 12:47 a.m. I stood there watching the timestamps, and something cold and sharp settled into my chest where my heart used to be. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I stayed at the Crystal Pavilion until the last guest left, until the catering team packed up the final tray, until the cleaning crew finished sweeping champagne flutes and crumpled napkins from the ballroom floor. My venue manager, Cole Hartford, found me in the office at 12:30 a.m., still watching security footage on a loop. Ms. Ashby? He used my maiden name, the one on all the venue paperwork. Everything okay? The event went perfectly, if you're worried about that. It was flawless, Cole. Thank you. I closed my laptop. Can you send me the complete security footage from tonight? All cameras, full evening. I want it for our promotional materials. He didn't question it. Why would he? I owned the building. I finally drove home at 1:15 a.m., my emerald dress wrinkled, my feet aching from heels I'd worn for 7 hours. Our house in Washington Park was dark except for the porch light, the one I'd installed with a timer because Gideon always forgot to leave it on. His Tesla sat in the driveway, perfectly centered, still warm when I walked past it. Inside, everything looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. Coffee mug in the sink from his breakfast. His leather bag on the counter where he dropped it before the gala. Mail stacked neatly on the entryway table. The picture of our wedding day still hanging in the foyer, both of us laughing, convinced we were building something that would last. I found him in our bedroom, already asleep, his phone charging on the nightstand. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching him breathe, and felt absolutely nothing. The guest room had become my de facto office over the past year, filled with event planning materials, fabric samples, and vendor catalogs. I changed out of my dress, threw on yoga pants and a Stanford sweatshirt, and opened my laptop at the small desk by the window. 2:47 a.m. I started a new document, evidence.docs. First, I downloaded the security footage Cole had sent. The files were massive, but my cloud storage could handle it. I clipped the relevant sections, Gideon and Alicia leaving within 2 minutes of each other. Their cars turning the same direction. The timestamp proving he'd lied about going home. Next, I opened my work email and started searching. Every message mentioning the Meridian Tech account. Every proposal, every client meeting, every strategic document I'd created. I forwarded them all to my personal email address, maintaining the full metadata showing creation dates and authorship. The email to Samuel from 5 days ago. Forward. The internal promotion committee notes from 6 weeks ago. Forward. The expense reports from the Austin conference. Forward and download. By 4:30 a.m., I had 3 folders organized: professional theft, financial evidence, and personal betrayal. Each one growing larger as I excavated the truth from 9 years of digital history. I found an email thread from 2 months ago that made my hands stop moving across the keyboard. Gideon to Hugh Mills, marked confidential. Hugh, regarding the promotion decisions, I think we need to be strategic about Meredith's advancement. Having both of us in senior leadership could create perception issues with the board, especially given the Whitmore criticism about nepotism last quarter. What if we position this as a wait and see for her while moving forward with my CIO promotion? It gives us flexibility and avoids the optics problem. Hugh's response: agreed. Handle the conversation carefully. Frame it as timing rather than qualification. I read it 3 times. Then I screenshotted it and added it to the professional theft folder. At 6 a.m., I heard Gideon moving around downstairs. Shower running. Coffee maker beeping. The familiar sounds of his morning routine that I'd woken up to for nearly a decade. I stayed in the guest room, waiting. He knocked on the door at 6:34. Meredith? You in there? Come in. He opened the door, already dressed in his running gear, looking concerned in that performative way he'd perfected. Hey. I didn't hear you come in last night. Everything okay? You seemed off at the gala. I seemed off. I repeated the words slowly, testing how they sounded. You gave a speech thanking your secretary for work I did, announced you're co-leading a division using my accounts, and sent emails reassigning my clients without telling me. But I seemed off. His expression shifted, concern melting into something more guarded. Meredith, that's not what happened. Alicia has been integral to the innovation team's success. I was acknowledging her contributions. By holding her hand on stage. By coordinating your outfits. By leaving the gala together. We didn't leave together. I went home. She went to her apartment. I turned my laptop screen toward him, showing the parking garage footage. You left at 9:44. She left at 9:46. Both cars turned left onto 17th Street. I paused. Where does Alicia live, Gideon? I don't know her exact address. Interesting. Because according to the HR directory I have access to as a senior coordinator, she lives at the Skyline Apartments on 18th and Welton. Which is exactly where your Tesla was parked from 10:02 p.m. until 12:47 a.m. I pulled up another screenshot. I have parking garage access through the venue's security network partnership. Technology is amazing these days. The color drained from his face. You're tracking me? I'm documenting public movements captured by security cameras I have legal access to. There's a difference. I stood up, closing the laptop. I need you to be honest with me right now. How long have you been sleeping with Alicia? I'm not, we haven't. He stopped, recalibrating. It's complicated. Complicated. I laughed, sharp and brittle. That's the word you're going with? We've gotten close. But nothing physical has happened. The doorbell rang, cutting him off. We both froze. It was 6:47 a.m. Nobody stopped by at 6:47 a.m. I walked past him to answer it, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, mid-50s, expensive suit, leather portfolio under her arm. I almost didn't answer, but something about the way she stood there, professional and patient, made me open the door. Meredith Rudd? She extended a business card. I'm Caitlin Dolan, senior partner at Dolan & Associates. I represent your husband in a legal matter. May I come in? Caitlin Dolan sat in our living room like she owned it, her leather portfolio open on the coffee table, documents arranged with precision. Gideon stood by the fireplace, refusing to meet my eyes. The morning sun streaming through the windows felt obscene, too bright, too cheerful for whatever was about to happen. Ms. Rudd, I'll be direct. Caitlin pulled out a manila folder. My client has asked me to facilitate a discussion regarding the dissolution of your marriage. The words hung in the air for 3 full seconds before my brain processed them. I'm sorry, what? Gideon has retained my services to initiate divorce proceedings. Given the complexity of your shared professional circumstances at Nexus Strategic, we believe an amicable separation is in everyone's best interest. I looked at my husband, the man who'd slept beside me last night, who I'd been married to for 9 years, who'd apparently hired a divorce attorney without mentioning it. You hired a lawyer before talking to me? Meredith, please. His voice was tired, rehearsed. We both know this hasn't been working for a while. Last night just made it obvious. You're not happy, I'm not happy. I didn't know I was unhappy until I watched you hold another woman's hand on stage while claiming credit for my work. My voice came out steadier than I felt. That's a fairly recent development. Caitlin interjected smoothly. Emotional circumstances aside, there are practical matters to address. The prenup protects what you each brought into the marriage and any family money. I know what the prenup says. I insisted on it. I turned to Gideon. Your mother thought I was a gold digger. Remember? She said I was marrying you for your prospects. That's not fair. What's not fair is finding out my marriage is over from a stranger in my living room at 7 in the morning. I stood up. I'm going to need some time to process this. And to find my own attorney. Of course. Caitlin slid a business card across the table. These are my contact details. I've prepared preliminary paperwork that outlines a proposed division of assets. Given that you have no children and the prenup is ironclad, this should be relatively straightforward. After she left, Gideon and I stood in our living room like strangers waiting for a bus. How long have you been planning this? I asked. It's not like that. Things changed. Alicia and I connected on a different level, and I realized what I've been missing. What you've been missing? I felt something crack inside my chest. You've been missing someone who lets you take credit for their work without complaint? Someone who doesn't have their own career accomplishments to threaten yours? That's not what this is about. Then what is it about, Gideon? Explain it to me. He ran his hand through his hair, a tell that meant he was about to say something he'd rehearsed. You've become so focused on your career, so competitive. Everything is about your next promotion, your next achievement. Alicia understands that work is important, but she doesn't make everything a contest. I make everything a contest. The words tasted like acid. I spent 4 months on the Meridian account, and you sent an email reassigning it to yourself and your girlfriend 5 days ago without telling me. But I'm the competitive one. See? This is exactly what I mean. You're always keeping score. I stared at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. Get out. What? Get out of this house. Go to Alicia's apartment, go to a hotel, I don't care. But I need you gone before I do something we'll both regret. He left without arguing. Maybe he'd been waiting for permission. I waited until his Tesla disappeared down the street before I let myself fall apart. 10 minutes. I gave myself 10 minutes to cry, to rage, to mourn the life I'd thought I was building. Then I washed my face, made coffee, and got to work. First call, Kendall in Boulder. I need a favor. Can you drive up today? Of course. What's wrong? Just doing some strategic planning. Third call, I hesitated before dialing, then committed. Samuel Jonas at Meridian Tech answered on the second ring. Meredith. Early for a Saturday call. Samuel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. If I left Nexus Strategic, would Meridian follow me? Silence. Then, in a heartbeat. Your contract is with Nexus, but our relationship is with you. If you're thinking about making a move, let's talk. I'm thinking about burning the whole thing down. Even better. I know 3 companies who'd kill to have you. One of them is us. We've been discussing expanding our events division. Interested? My hands shook as I gripped the phone. Very. Good. Let me make some calls. Don't do anything rash until we talk Monday. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and navigated to Nexus Strategic's employee portal. My access was still active, they hadn't locked me out yet. Rookie mistake. I downloaded everything. Client databases, vendor contracts, strategic plans, financial projections. Every document I'd created or contributed to over 5 years. The metadata would prove authorship if it ever came to that. Then I checked the company calendar. Gideon had a meeting scheduled for Monday at 9 a.m., leadership team, strategic realignment discussion. I clicked into the meeting notes. My name appeared 17 times. None of it good. The meeting was being held at the Crystal Pavilion. My building. They'd reserved the Aspen conference room for 3 hours, requesting coffee service and AV equipment. I smiled for the first time since last night. They wanted to discuss my future in my own venue. Perfect. Kendall arrived at noon with 3 roller bags, her laptop, and enough righteous fury to power the entire city. My sister had always been the fighter, environmental lawyer, marathon runner, the kind of person who read corporate corruption cases for fun. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug that nearly broke me open again. "Tell me everything," she said, dropping her bags in the entryway. So I did. The gala, the speech, Alicia, the parking garage footage, the lawyer showing up at dawn. By the time I finished, she'd filled 6 pages of her legal pad with notes. Okay. She tapped her pen against the paper. First thing, you need your own attorney. I can make calls. Second, we need to document every single thing he's stolen from you professionally. Third, we're going to find out exactly how long this has been going on and whether company resources were used to facilitate it. How do we do that? We talk to people who've left Nexus under suspicious circumstances. Companies like this don't have one victim, they have patterns. She pulled up LinkedIn on her laptop. Who else has quit or been fired in the past year? I thought back through the exodus of talent that nobody ever talked about openly. Denver Dawson. He was VP of Client Relations. Left suddenly last March, took a job in Phoenix. What happened? Official story was he wanted a change. But he and Gideon had been arguing about something before he left. Denver kept saying the innovation division was getting credit for deals they hadn't closed. Kendall typed rapidly. Found him. Still in Phoenix. Want me to reach out? Use your lawyer credentials. He's more likely to talk to you than me. The conversation with Denver lasted an hour over speakerphone. By the end, I had copies of 8 months of emails he'd saved, performance reviews that contradicted his termination, and documentation of the Titan Industries account, a deal Denver had spent 8 months developing before Gideon claimed credit and Denver's position was eliminated due to restructuring. He filed a complaint with HR, Kendall told me after hanging up. Investigation found nothing wrong. 2 weeks later, his job was gone. Severance package with a non-disparagement clause. So he couldn't fight it. Not without losing the money he needed for his kids' college tuition. But non-disparagement clauses fall apart when there's evidence of fraud or systematic misconduct. She made more notes. If we can show a pattern, his evidence becomes relevant. 2 more calls that afternoon brought similar stories. Jennifer Park, former head of strategic planning, same pattern. Marcus Dolan, former senior analyst, same ending. Both had documentation they'd been too afraid to use. Until now. My phone rang. Carrie's name flashed on the screen. Meredith, I just heard. Someone from legal called asking about your access to client files. Are you okay? They're locking me out already? Not yet, but it's coming. Hugh called an emergency leadership meeting for Monday morning. I wasn't supposed to tell you, but, she lowered her voice. They're discussing your performance issues and whether your continued employment creates conflicts of interest given your pending divorce. Performance issues. I've landed more accounts this year than anyone else in the company. I know. But Gideon's been building a narrative. I've heard him tell people you've been distracted, making mistakes, that your personal stress is affecting your work quality. She paused. Meredith, you need to protect yourself. They're going to try to push you out before you can defend yourself. After I hung up, Kendall was already on her 3rd call. She'd tracked down Mara Rudd, a former marketing coordinator who'd left Nexus 14 months ago after only 6 months with the company. She wants to meet in person, Kendall said. Says she has documents she didn't include in her exit interview because she was afraid of retaliation. Can we do coffee at 2? We met Mara at a cafe in Capitol Hill, far enough from Nexus territory that we wouldn't run into anyone. She was young, maybe 26, with nervous energy and a manila envelope she guarded like classified documents. I should have said something when it happened, she started without preamble. But I was scared. I needed the job, and Gideon made it clear what happened to people who caused problems. What happened? I asked gently. I was assigned to support the innovation division for a product launch event. 6 weeks of work, venue selection, vendor coordination, creative direction, everything. I did 90% of the actual labor. She pulled photos from her envelope. This is the pitch deck I created. Every slide, every graphic, every word. I have the design files with timestamps to prove it. She slid another document across, an internal memo from Gideon to Hugh Mills. The Velocity product launch was a complete success, demonstrating the innovation division's event management capabilities. Special recognition to Alicia Dawson for her creative vision and execution. Mara's voice shook. Alicia attended 2 meetings and picked tablecloth colors. When I tried to correct the record, Gideon called me into his office and said I was showing poor team mentality and inappropriate credit-seeking behavior. 2 weeks later, I was fired for performance issues. Do you still have the design files? Kendall asked. Everything. I backed it all up before they cut my access. She met my eyes. When I heard what happened at the gala, I knew he was doing to you what he did to me. Just on a bigger scale. By the time we left that cafe, we had statements from Mara, expense reports showing Alicia charging personal shopping trips to company cards, calendar invites revealing dozens of private strategy sessions between Gideon and Alicia that lasted 3 to 4 hours each, and screenshots of messages where Gideon told her to claim ownership of various projects. And I had the names of 2 more former employees to contact. By Sunday evening, the evidence covered my dining room table in organized piles, 18 months of systematic misconduct, documented and ready to deploy. Sunday morning, Kendall and I converted my dining room into a war room. Documents covered every surface, printed emails, expense reports, timeline charts tracking Gideon's pattern of credit theft. She'd labeled everything with color-coded sticky notes. Yellow for professional misconduct, pink for financial irregularities, blue for affair evidence. You need to see this, she said, pulling up something on her laptop. I've been going through Nexus's corporate filings. Did you know the company has an ethics hotline and a whistleblower protection policy? Sure. It's in the employee handbook nobody reads. Right. But according to Colorado law, companies over 50 employees are required to investigate credible reports of executive misconduct. And if they retaliate against the whistleblower, they're opening themselves up to serious liability. She turned the screen toward me. What if we don't wait for them to fire you? What if you file a formal complaint first? About what specifically? He's been stealing credit for people's work for years, using company money for his affair, and pushing out anyone who calls him on it. We have Denver, Mara, and probably others. We have documentation. We have a pattern of behavior. She ticked them off on her fingers. That's not a personnel issue, that's a compliance nightmare. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Unknown Denver number. Ms. Rudd? This is Hugh Mills. I hope I'm not calling too early. My CEO. Calling on a Sunday morning. Not at all, Hugh. What can I do for you? I'd like to meet with you this afternoon if you're available. Privately, not at the office. There are some matters we should discuss before tomorrow's leadership meeting. Everything in me wanted to refuse, to make him come to me, to assert some kind of control. But Kendall was frantically writing on her notepad, say yes. Find out what he knows. Of course. What time and where? The Craftsman Hotel in Cherry Creek, 3 p.m. There's a quiet lounge area. I'll reserve us a corner table. After I hung up, Kendall was already pulling out fresh legal pads. He's either going to try to buy you off or warn you that they're pushing you out. Either way, you record everything. I can't record him without consent. Colorado law says I can't record without telling him. Then take detailed notes immediately after. Timestamp everything. If he makes threats or admissions, you document them the second you walk out. She paused. Want me to come with you? No. If he's willing to meet alone, should keep it that way. But stay on call in case I need you. The Craftsman Hotel was exactly the kind of place people chose for discreet conversations, elegant, expensive, with enough ambient noise to obscure private discussions. Hugh was already waiting when I arrived, looking older than I remembered. The past 6 months had added gray to his temples and lines around his eyes. Meredith. Thank you for coming. He stood, gestured to the seat across from him. Can I order you something? Just water, thanks. We sat in silence while the server brought drinks. Hugh studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read, concern, maybe, or calculation. I'm going to be direct, he finally said. I've received information about tomorrow's meeting that concerns me. There's an agenda item about your performance and continued employment that I wasn't consulted on until Friday afternoon. Gideon arranged it? Gideon and Alicia, with support from 2 other division heads who've apparently bought into whatever narrative they're selling. He took a long drink of his scotch. I built Nexus on the principle that merit matters more than politics. What I'm seeing now violates everything I intended this company to be. I chose my words carefully. What exactly have you heard about tomorrow's meeting? That they plan to present a case for your termination based on performance issues, failure to meet strategic objectives, and, this is the part that really bothers me, claims that you've been undermining Gideon's authority and spreading false accusations about his relationship with Alicia. False accusations. Which is interesting, because I've done my own investigation over the past 24 hours. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like expense reports. Alicia Dawson has charged over $63,000 to company accounts in the past 8 months. Dinners, travel, hotels, shopping, all categorized as client entertainment or professional development. But when I cross-reference them with actual client meetings and approved training events, less than 20% have legitimate business justification. My heart started racing. You looked into this? I'm the CEO. When I hear that a marriage is dissolving and a divorce attorney shows up at someone's house without warning, I pay attention. Especially when it involves 2 senior employees. He met my eyes directly. I made calls yesterday. Denver Dawson, Mara Rudd, 3 other former employees who left under suspicious circumstances. Every single one of them described the same pattern: excellent work stolen by Gideon, credit given to Alicia, anyone who complained was pushed out. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm giving you a choice. He set his scotch down with deliberate precision. Tomorrow morning, you can walk into that meeting and be ambushed by Gideon's narrative. They'll terminate you for cause, which means no severance, no references, and a black mark on your record that will follow you for years. Or you come in with your own documentation and file a formal ethics complaint before they can vote. Force an independent investigation. The board will have to take it seriously if it's properly documented and filed through official channels. He paused. I can't stop tomorrow's meeting, Meredith. But I can make sure the board hears your side before any decisions are made. And if I file a complaint? Then you're protected under whistleblower laws, and they can't touch you without proving their case. Which, based on what I've seen, they can't do. He leaned forward. But I need to know, do you have real evidence, or is this just suspicion? I thought about the dining room full of documents, the statements from former employees, the expense reports and emails and security footage Kendall had organized into an airtight case. I have evidence. Good. Then use it. Tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m., you file your complaint with legal and HR, copy me directly. By the time their 9 a.m. meeting starts, the investigation will already be open, and every word they say becomes potential retaliation. He stood up, leaving cash on the table for the drinks. One more thing. The Crystal Pavilion, that's your building, isn't it? Under your maiden name? My throat went dry. How did you? I did my homework. Which means tomorrow's meeting is happening in a venue you own and control. He almost smiled. That's either very ironic or very strategic. I'm betting on strategic. After he left, I sat in that hotel lounge for another 10 minutes, processing what had just happened. My CEO had just handed me the weapon I needed to fight back. I pulled out my phone and called Kendall. Change of plans, I said. We're filing a formal complaint first thing tomorrow morning. And I need you to help me prepare a presentation for the leadership team. What kind of presentation? The kind that ends careers. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of November day that made Denver's skyline look sharp enough to cut. Kendall and I arrived at the Crystal Pavilion at 7 a.m., 2 hours before the leadership meeting was scheduled to start. Cole met us in the lobby, confused. Ms. Ashby? We weren't expecting you this early. The Nexus meeting isn't until 9. I know. But I need access to the Aspen conference room right now. Can you set up the AV system for a presentation? Of course. Anything else? Make sure all the building security cameras are recording. And Cole? No matter what happens this morning, no one gets access to the security office except me. Understood. His expression shifted. He'd worked for me long enough to recognize when something serious was happening. Understood. Kendall and I spent the next hour setting up. She'd worked until 3 a.m. preparing the presentation, organizing 18 months of evidence into a narrative so clear that even the most willfully blind executive couldn't ignore it. At 8:30 a.m., I walked into Nexus Strategic's main office for what I knew might be the last time as an employee. The HR director, Patricia Webb, was already at her desk, working through emails with her morning coffee. Meredith. She looked up, surprised. You're here early. I thought. I need to file a formal complaint. I set a manila envelope on her desk, along with a USB drive. This documents 18 months of Gideon stealing credit for other people's work, using company money inappropriately, and pushing out employees who questioned him. I'm filing under the company's ethics policy and requesting an immediate independent investigation. Patricia's face went pale. Meredith, if this is about the divorce. This is about corporate fraud. The divorce is just evidence of one component. I slid a second copy across her desk. That's for legal. I've copied Hugh Mills directly, as required by company policy. The complaint is now officially logged and timestamped. Any adverse action taken against me from this moment forward is retaliation under Colorado whistleblower protection laws. I walked out before she could respond. By 8:47 a.m., my phone started buzzing. First Hugh, texting, received. Well done. Then Carrie, what did you do? Patricia just ran into Hugh's office looking like she saw a ghost. Then an unknown number that turned out to be the company's outside legal counsel requesting an emergency meeting. At 8:55 a.m., I walked back into the Crystal Pavilion and took the elevator to the second floor. Through the Aspen conference room's glass walls, I could see the leadership team already gathering. Gideon stood near the head of the table, his laptop open, looking confident. Alicia sat beside him, wearing a navy suit that probably cost $3,000. Neither of them had noticed me yet. I pushed open the door at exactly 9 a.m. Good morning, everyone. Sorry I'm late. The room went silent. Gideon's expression shifted from confidence to confusion to something that might have been fear. Meredith. He recovered quickly. This is a leadership meeting. I don't think. I'm aware. I received the calendar invite. I walked to the front of the room, connecting my laptop to the presentation system. But before we discuss my performance issues, I thought it would be helpful to review some other performance metrics. Hugh, do you mind if I use a few minutes? Hugh Mills sat at the far end of the table, his expression carefully neutral. By all means. I think everyone would benefit from seeing your data. The first slide appeared on the screen: pattern recognition, an analysis of credit theft, financial misconduct, and systematic retaliation at Nexus Strategic. Alicia's face drained of color. Over the past 18 months, I began, my voice steady and professional. 27 major accounts and strategic initiatives have been credited to the Innovation Division leadership. This presentation will demonstrate that 23 of those 27 were actually developed, pitched, and closed by other employees whose contributions were systematically erased. Click. The next slide showed a timeline with names, dates, and dollar amounts. The Meridian Tech account, $4.3 million annual value. Developed by me over 4 months. Reassigned to Gideon Rudd and Alicia Dawson via email 5 days ago without client consultation or my knowledge. The Titan Industries Partnership, $2.8 million. Developed by Denver Dawson over 8 months. Credited to Innovation Division 1 week after Denver was terminated for performance issues. The Velocity product launch, $890,000 budget. Creative direction and execution by Mara Rudd. She was fired 3 weeks after Alicia Dawson received a promotion based on that event's success. I clicked through slide after slide. Each one showed the same pattern: work created by someone else, credit claimed by Gideon, implementation often delegated to Alicia, original creator pushed out or silenced. Now let's discuss financial irregularities. The expense reports appeared on screen, highlighted in yellow where charges didn't match legitimate business purposes. Hotel rooms in Aspen during client meetings that never happened. Designer shopping labeled as professional wardrobe expenses. Dinners for 2 at romantic restaurants categorized as strategic planning sessions. Over the past 8 months, Alicia Dawson has charged $63,000 to company accounts. I cross-checked every expense against actual client meetings and approved training. 80%? Fake. No business purpose. Someone gasped. I didn't look to see who. Finally, let's examine the retaliation pattern. This slide showed 5 names with photos: Denver Dawson, Mara Rudd, and 3 others. Beneath each photo was their termination date and the reason given. 5 employees in 18 months. All terminated within weeks of questioning credit attribution or reporting concerns about the Innovation Division's practices. All signed severance agreements with non-disparagement clauses. All left with their reputations damaged and their careers disrupted. I paused, letting the data sink in. This morning at 8:30 a.m., I filed a formal ethics complaint documenting all of this. The evidence includes emails, expense reports, client testimonials, security footage, and signed statements from 4 former employees willing to testify about the systematic misconduct they experienced and witnessed. Gideon finally found his voice. This is, you can't just make accusations without. I'm not making accusations. I'm presenting documented facts. Every slide in this presentation is backed by evidence that's been submitted to HR, legal, and Hugh Mills. The investigation is already open. I paused, looking around the room, then delivered the line I'd been saving. And one more thing. This meeting is taking place in my building. The Crystal Pavilion belongs to me, has for 3 years, through my family trust under my maiden name. You gave your promotion speech on my stage, Gideon, under my chandeliers, in front of my cameras. Every word you said that night? I have it recorded. Every lie you've told since? Documented in a building I control. The room went dead silent. Even Hugh looked surprised. So please, I continued. Tell everyone about my performance issues. Here. In my venue. On my security system. While I record every word. The silence was absolute. Hugh Mills stood up. I think we need to adjourn this meeting. Gideon, Alicia, my office, immediately. Everyone else, please return to your departments. You'll be hearing from legal and HR today about cooperation with the investigation. As people filed out, Carrie caught my eye and mouthed, "Holy shit." Kendall appeared in the doorway, giving me a thumbs up. And I stood at the front of that conference room in my building, watching my husband's career implode in real time, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clean satisfaction. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. By Tuesday afternoon, the outside legal counsel had interviewed 8 current employees, for former employees, and reviewed over 3,000 pages of documentation. By Wednesday morning, Alicia Dawson's desk was being packed up by security. I watched from Carrie's office as they escorted her out through the lobby, her designer heels clicking against marble floors for the last time. She didn't cry or protest. She just walked out with her box of belongings and her head down, the same way Mara Rudd had walked out 18 months earlier. "They're calling it immediate termination for cause," Carrie said quietly. "No severance, no references." Her company email was deactivated at 9 a.m. "What about Gideon?" "Still in meetings with legal. But I heard he's been suspended pending the investigation's final report." She paused. "Meredith, people are talking. The whole office knows what he did. What they both did." By Thursday, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Samuel Jonas from Meridian Tech called first thing in the morning. I saw the news about Nexus's internal investigation. "Want to talk about that events division position? I can have an offer letter ready by end of day." Then Denver Dawson, "I heard what you did. Thank you. You have no idea what this means to those of us who got buried by him." Then Mara, "They called me yesterday. Asked if I'd be willing to provide testimony for a potential lawsuit. I said yes." Then 3 other former Nexus employees I barely knew, all with similar stories of stolen work and ruined reputations, all thanking me for finally exposing what they'd been too afraid to report. Friday afternoon, Hugh Mills called me into his office. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from watching your company's reputation crumble in real time. "The board met this morning," he said without preamble. "Gideon Rudd's employment is terminated effective immediately. We're also conducting a full audit of the Innovation Division's financial practices going back 3 years. Good. There's more. The board has asked me to offer you a settlement. 6 months' salary, continued health benefits, and a strong reference letter in exchange for your resignation and a mutual non-disparagement agreement." I'd been expecting this. "No. Meredith. You want me to quietly disappear so the company can control the narrative. You want to pay me to protect Nexus's reputation while the person who actually built half your client portfolio walks away with nothing but a reference letter." I leaned forward. "Here's my counteroffer. I resign effective today, but I keep my client relationships. Every account I personally develop transfers with me to wherever I go next. Meridian Tech, Pinnacle Insurance, Sterling Communications, all of them. You get to avoid a lawsuit, and I get to take my work with me." Hugh was quiet for a long moment. "You realize that could devastate our revenue. You realize that's exactly what Gideon did to 5 other employees, and nobody stopped him until now?" I stood up. "I don't want your settlement, Hugh. I want what I earned. Either I take my accounts and leave peacefully, or I stay and watch this investigation expose every corrupt practice that's been ignored for years. Your choice." He made a call to the board. 20 minutes later, I had my answer: 3 major accounts: Meridian Tech, $4.3 million, Pinnacle Insurance, $1.8 million, and Sterling Communications, $1.1 million, total annual value of $7.2 million, would follow me wherever I went. In exchange, I'd sign a separation agreement that protected both sides from litigation. I walked out of Nexus Strategic at 4:37 p.m. on Friday, November 17th, exactly 1 week after the gala that had destroyed my marriage and rebuilt my life. Gideon's car was in the driveway when I got home that evening. I found him in the living room, surrounded by boxes, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 7 days. "Meredith." He stood up when I walked in. "Can we talk? I don't think there's anything left to say. Please. Just 5 minutes." He looked desperate, broken. "I need you to understand, I never meant for any of this to happen. The thing with Alicia, it just evolved. We connected, and I got caught up in something I couldn't control. You got caught up in stealing my work and giving it to your girlfriend. That was a choice, Gideon. Multiple choices, made over 18 months. I know. I screwed up. But we built a life together. 9 years, Meredith. That has to count for something. It did count. Past tense. I walked past him toward the stairs. I'm taking the guest room furniture and my personal items. Everything else is yours. The divorce papers are on the kitchen counter. Sign them, and we never have to see each other again. What about the house? Keep it. I don't want anything that reminds me of this marriage. I paused on the stairs. Actually, that's not true. I want one thing. What? I want you to know that every time you walk into a conference room for the rest of your career, people will Google your name and find articles about the investigation. Every job interview, every client meeting, every professional interaction will be shadowed by what you did. You didn't just steal from me, Gideon. You stole from everyone who trusted you, and that record is permanent. His face crumbled. Meredith, please. You gave a speech at my venue, in front of 200 people, thanking another woman for my accomplishments. You held her hand on my stage under my chandeliers while erasing everything I'd built. I felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. I don't need revenge, Gideon. The truth is enough. I went upstairs and started packing. Through the window, I watched the sun set over Denver, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Tomorrow, I'd start at Meridian Tech tomorrow, I'd begin building something new. But tonight, I'd mourn the marriage I'd thought I had, not the one that actually existed, but the one I'd believed in. The partnership I'd imagined. The future I'd planned. By midnight, my car was loaded with everything I cared about keeping. I took one last look at the house in Washington Park, at the life I was leaving behind, and felt nothing but relief. Kendall was waiting at her apartment with wine and ice cream when I arrived at 12:47 a.m. How are you feeling? She asked. I thought about it. Really thought about it. Free, I finally said. I feel free. 6 months later, I stood in Meridian Tech's executive conference room on the 23rd floor, looking out at a view of the Rocky Mountains that made my old cubicle at Nexus seem like a prison cell. The door opened behind me. Ready for the board presentation? Samuel Jonas asked, setting down 2 cups of coffee on the table. They're eager to hear about Q1 results. More than ready. I pulled up the presentation on the screen. We exceeded projections by 42%. The numbers told their own story. 3 accounts I'd brought from Nexus had flourished under proper management. Meridian Tech's internal events division, which I'd built from nothing, had landed 6 new clients in 4 months. Revenue was up $3.2 million from this time last year. The board's already approved your promotion, Samuel said casually. Vice President of Strategic Events and Client Experiences. Congratulations. The announcement goes out Monday. I'd been expecting the conversation about promotion, but not quite this soon. Thank you. I won't let you down. You haven't yet. He paused. There's something else. We've been approached about acquiring what's left of Nexus Strategic. The company's been hemorrhaging clients since the investigation became public. Hugh Mills is looking for a buyer before they have to file for bankruptcy protection. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. What does that have to do with me? The board wants you to lead the due diligence team. You know their operations better than anyone, and frankly, we trust your judgment about what's worth salvaging. He met my eyes. I know it's complicated given your history there. You can say no. I thought about it. Nexus Strategic, the company where I'd spent 5 years building my career, now on the verge of collapse. Hugh Mills, who'd given me a chance to fight back, now watching his life's work disintegrate. The employees who'd had nothing to do with Gideon's misconduct, now facing unemployment. I'll do it, I said. But I have conditions. By the end of the month, Meridian Tech had acquired Nexus Strategic's client portfolio, office lease, and selected personnel. Hugh Mills took a consulting position with a graceful exit package. 15 employees who'd been victims of Gideon's toxic culture got offers to join Meridian with raises and title corrections that reflected their actual contributions. Carrie was the first to accept. "I can't believe you're rescuing us," she said over coffee at our new favorite spot near Meridian's offices. "After everything that happened. I'm not rescuing anyone. I'm hiring good people who deserve better than what they got." I paused. "Speaking of which, I have a position opening on my team. Director of Event Operations. Interested?" Her eyes widened. "Meredith, I can't just. You've been coordinating major events for 3 years without proper title or compensation. I've seen your work. You're overqualified if anything." I slid a folder across the table. "That's the job description and salary range. Think about it." She opened the folder, saw the numbers, and started crying. "This is more than Gideon made as CIO. You're worth more than Gideon ever was." The Denver Business Journal ran a feature story in May, "From Betrayal to Boardroom: How Meredith Ashby Built an Events Empire." The article detailed the Nexus investigation, the acquisition, and Meridian's explosive growth. They interviewed former employees who praised my leadership. They quoted clients who'd followed me specifically because they trusted my vision. The article mentioned Gideon exactly once, in a footnote. Former Nexus CIO Gideon Rudd, whose termination sparked the investigation, could not be reached for comment. I didn't try to find out where he'd ended up. It didn't matter. What mattered was the text from Kendall, "Have you seen this?" with a link to a LinkedIn post. Mara Rudd had written about her experience being fired from Nexus, her struggle to find work afterward, and her recent hiring as Meridian's creative director. "Sometimes justice takes time," she wrote. "But it comes. Thank you to the leaders who believe in merit over politics, and especially to Meredith Ashby for proving that integrity wins in the end." The post had 4,000 likes and 300 comments, most of them from other professionals sharing their own stories of workplace betrayal and eventual vindication. I was reading through the comments when my assistant knocked on my office door. "Ms. Ashby? You have a visitor in the lobby. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." "Alicia Dawson?" My first instinct was to refuse. But curiosity won out. Alicia looked different than she had 6 months ago. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by something off the rack from a department store. Her hair was shorter, her makeup minimal. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, standing awkwardly in my doorway. "I know I have no right to ask." "You don't." I didn't invite her to sit. "What do you want, Alicia?" I wanted to apologize. For everything. For taking credit for your work, for the affair, for not speaking up when I knew what was happening was wrong. She twisted her hands together. "I've been in therapy, trying to understand why I let myself become that person. Why I thought that was okay." "And what did you discover?" "That I was so desperate to matter, to be important, that I let Gideon convince me his attention was the same as having value." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I destroyed your marriage, your career at Nexus, your reputation. And I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to hear it." I studied her for a long moment. 6 months ago, this apology might have meant something. Now it just felt empty. "I appreciate you coming here," I said finally. "But I don't forgive you. Maybe someday, but not today. What you did to me, you also did to Mara, to Denver, to everyone else whose work you claimed. That pattern of behavior isn't fixed with an apology." "I know." She nodded, accepting it. I just needed to try. After she left, I sat in my office watching the mountains turn purple with the sunset, thinking about forgiveness and redemption and whether some actions deserved neither. My phone buzzed. "Samuel, board meeting went well. They're impressed. Dinner to celebrate?" My treat. I smiled. Sounds perfect. The past was the past. The future was mine to build. 1 year after the gala, Kendall and I stood in the newly renovated second floor of the Crystal Pavilion. What had been generic conference space was now the flagship location for Ashby Events, my own company, launched in partnership with Meridian Tech over the summer. "This is incredible," Kendall said, running her hand along the custom marble reception desk. "You've built something amazing here." The space reflected everything I'd learned about what mattered. Open floor plans that encouraged collaboration. Private offices with glass walls for transparency. A resource library stocked with design books and industry publications. And in the center, a conference room with a panoramic view of Denver's skyline. Above the entrance, brushed steel letters spelled out the company motto I'd chosen: merit, vision, integrity. "The first event is Saturday," I told Kendall. "A women's leadership summit. 300 attendees, all successful professionals who've overcome workplace discrimination or harassment. Keynote speaker is a federal judge who sued her former law firm for gender discrimination and won." "Who's sponsoring it?" "Meridian Tech. But 12 other companies signed on as co-sponsors once they heard about it." I pulled up the registration list on my tablet. "We're at capacity and have a wait list of 200. Kendall smiled. "Mom would be proud. Our mother had died when I was 26, too young to see me build anything significant. But I like to think she'd have approved of what I'd created from the ashes of betrayal, not just a business, but a movement toward accountability." My phone rang. Carrie's name flashed on the screen. "Turn on the news," she said without greeting. "Channel 9. Now." I grabbed the remote and switched on the television mounted in the conference room. A reporter stood outside a courthouse in downtown Denver. Former Nexus strategic employees have filed a class action lawsuit against Gideon Rudd, alleging systematic credit theft, workplace harassment, and financial fraud spanning 3 years. The lawsuit, which includes 7 plaintiffs, seeks compensatory damages and aims to establish precedent for. I turned up the volume. The reporter continued, "The plaintiffs include Denver Dawson, former VP of Client Relations, and Mara Rudd, former marketing coordinator, both of whom provided key testimony in the internal investigation that led to Rudd's termination last year. Their attorney says this case represents a broader pattern of executive misconduct that many companies fail to address until significant damage has been done." The screen cut to footage of Denver Dawson on the courthouse steps. "This isn't about revenge," he said into a cluster of microphones. "This is about setting a standard that stolen work has consequences. That reputations matter. That people who build careers on other people's achievements should be held accountable." "Did you know about this?" Kendall asked. "Denver mentioned he was talking to attorneys months ago, but I didn't know it had gotten this far." I watched the news coverage, feeling something complicated settle in my chest. They don't need me to fight their battles. They're doing it themselves. That evening, I met Samuel Jonas for dinner at Guard and Grace, Denver's premier steakhouse. We'd fallen into a routine of weekly strategy dinners that were 90% business and 10% something neither of us had quite defined yet. "Saw the news about the lawsuit," he said, after we'd ordered. "How do you feel about it?" "Honestly? Relieved. For a while, I worried that nothing would change. That Gideon would land somewhere else and do the same thing to different people." I took a sip of wine. "But this makes it permanent record. Any company that Googles his name will find the lawsuit. That follows you forever. Justice through documentation." Samuel raised his glass. "Very on brand for you." We talked about the leadership summit, about Meridian's expansion into 3 new markets, about the proposal I was developing for a national event series focused on ethical business practices. Somewhere between the appetizers and entrees, the conversation shifted from professional to personal. "Can I ask you something?" Samuel set down his fork. "And you can tell me it's none of my business." "Go ahead." "The divorce, it's been final for 8 months now. Have you thought about what comes next? Not professionally, but personally?" I considered the question. The divorce had been finalized in March, a quiet proceeding where Gideon's attorney and mine signed papers in a conference room while we sat in separate buildings. I'd kept my maiden name professionally, which meant I never had to change anything back. The house in Washington Park sold for a profit we split 50-50, as the prenup required. "I've thought about it," I said carefully. "But I'm not sure I'm ready to trust someone like that again. To be that vulnerable. What if you didn't have to be vulnerable? What if you built something with someone as an equal from the start?" He met my eyes. "I'm not talking about a business partnership. Samuel. I know the timing is complicated. I know we work together, and that creates its own issues. But I've watched you rebuild yourself over the past year. I've seen your integrity, your intelligence, your refusal to compromise your values even when it would be easier." He paused. "I'd like to take you to dinner. An actual date, not a strategy session. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who respect each other seeing if there's something more." I studied his face, earnest, hopeful, patient. Samuel Jonas had never asked me for anything except excellent work. He'd given me opportunities when I needed them most. He'd trusted me with significant responsibility. But he'd never crossed a professional line until now. "One date," I said finally. "But not at a steakhouse where we always talk about work. Somewhere completely different. The Botanical Gardens? They have a summer concert series." I smiled. "Perfect." Later that night, alone in my apartment in the Alberta Arts District, I opened my laptop and looked at the calendar. The leadership summit was Saturday. The following week, I had meetings with 3 potential new clients. The week after that, Carrie would officially start as Director of Event Operations. And somewhere in there, I'd go on a date with a man who saw me as an equal, not a reflection of his own ambitions. I closed the laptop and looked around my apartment, smaller than the house I'd shared with Gideon, but entirely mine. Every book on the shelf, I'd chosen. Every piece of art on the walls reflected my taste. Every decision about this space belonged to me alone. The woman who'd stood at the back of the Crystal Pavilion ballroom 12 months ago, watching her husband thank another woman for her work, would barely recognize me now. And that felt like the greatest success of all. 18 months after the gala, I stood backstage at the Colorado Convention Center, waiting to deliver the keynote address at the Rocky Mountain Business Leaders Summit. 5,000 professionals filled the auditorium, executives, entrepreneurs, startup founders, all gathered to discuss the future of ethical leadership in corporate America. My phone buzzed with a text from Kendall. "Dad would be so proud. Wish he could see this." Our father had passed away 2 months after my divorce was finalized, complications from the surgery I'd been in Seattle for when Gideon and Alicia had their Austin conference. He'd lived long enough to see me land on my feet at Meridian, long enough to tell me he'd never trusted Gideon anyway, long enough to meet Samuel and give his approval in that subtle way fathers do. "You're on in 5, a stagehand said, adjusting my lapel microphone. I took a deep breath and walked to the wings, watching the previous speaker wrap up. Through a gap in the curtains, I could see the massive audience. And there, in the 7th row, sat a man I recognized despite the weight loss and cheaper suit. Gideon. He looked different. Older, diminished, the confidence that had once defined him replaced by something that looked like defeat. He was taking notes on a yellow legal pad, probably hoping nobody would recognize him. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed across the auditorium. "Please welcome Meredith Ashby, founder and CEO of Ashby Events, Vice President of Strategic Development at Meridian Tech, and this year's recipient of the Colorado Business Ethics Award." The applause was thunderous as I walked onto the stage. The lights were bright enough that I couldn't see individual faces anymore, but I knew Gideon was watching. I could feel it. 3 years ago, I began, my voice steady and clear. I stood in the back of a ballroom watching my husband accept a promotion for work I had done. I watched him thank another woman for my accomplishments. And I believed that was just how things worked, that the people with power got to write the narrative, and the rest of us had to accept it. I paused, letting the words settle over the audience. I was wrong. And I spent the next year proving it. For 45 minutes, I told my story. Not the sanitized version or the victim's version, but the strategic one. How I'd documented everything. How I'd gathered evidence and built coalitions. How I'd used the systems that were supposed to protect employees, ethics policies, whistleblower protections, securities regulations, to expose systematic fraud. I talked about the 5 other employees who'd been silenced before me. About the pattern of behavior that companies ignored until it became too expensive to ignore. About the difference between revenge and accountability. The cost of stolen work isn't just personal, I said, approaching my conclusion. It's institutional. When we allow people to build careers on other people's achievements, we create cultures where the best employees leave, where innovation dies, where mediocrity gets rewarded because it knows how to play politics better than it knows how to do the actual work. I clicked to my final slide, which showed nothing but 3 words in large type. Document. Expose. Build. Document everything, because truth without evidence is just your word against theirs. Expose the pattern, because one victim looks like an isolated incident, but 5 victims looks like a system. And build something new, because the best response to being erased isn't destroying your enemies, it's creating something so undeniable that your name becomes synonymous with the standard they can never meet. The standing ovation lasted 6 minutes. As I left the stage, my phone was already buzzing with messages. Carrie, that was incredible. Samuel, dinner tonight to celebrate? Mara, thank you for telling our story. But the message that stopped me came from an unknown number. I was in the audience. What you said about documentation changed my perspective. I'm a senior analyst at Morrison Tech, and I've been watching my manager take credit for my work for 18 months. I've been too scared to do anything about it. Not anymore. Would you be willing to talk? Her name was Kendall Mills. 27 years old, brilliant, and trapped in the same cycle I'd escaped. We met for coffee the next morning at the same cafe where I'd met Mara 18 months earlier. History repeating, but this time I was on the other side of it. I don't know where to start, Kendall said, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that was clearly more comfort than caffeine. Start by telling me what you've been doing, and what credit your manager has been taking. For an hour, she outlined a pattern I knew by heart. The late nights. The presentations she'd built that her manager delivered. The clients she'd cultivated who now thought her manager was their primary contact. The promotion she'd been promised that kept getting delayed for unclear reasons. Everyone says I should just tough it out, she said. That this is how you pay your dues. That if I'm patient, eventually I'll get recognized. That's what they told me too. I pulled out my business card and wrote a name on the back. This is my attorney. She specializes in employment law and whistleblower cases. Before you talk to her, I want you to start documenting everything, emails, meeting notes, project files with your name in the metadata. Can you do that? Yes. But what if they find out? What if I lose my job? What if you don't fight and lose yourself instead? I met her eyes. I'm not going to tell you this will be easy. It won't be. You'll have moments where you question whether it's worth it, where the path of least resistance looks really appealing. But 3 years from now, do you want to be sitting in a ballroom watching someone else get promoted for your work? Or do you want to be the one on stage telling your story about how you fought back? She was quiet for a long moment. Then, I want to fight. Good. Then let's get you ready. That afternoon, I met with Samuel at the Botanical Gardens, the same place we'd had our first official date 6 months earlier. We'd been taking it slow, both of us cautious about mixing professional and personal relationships after what I'd been through. But somewhere between planning Meridian's expansion and launching Ashby events together, we'd built something that felt solid. Another mentee? He asked, as we walked through the rose garden. Her name is Kendall Mills. Different company, same story. I paused by a trellis covered in climbing roses. How many more of these conversations do you think I'll have? As many as it takes. You're building a legacy, Meredith. Not just a company, a movement. That sounds grandiose. It's accurate. He took my hand, a gesture that still felt new enough to be thrilling. You've helped 5 women in the past year escape toxic situations. Carrie's thriving. Mara's won 2 industry awards. Denver Dawson just got appointed to a VP position at his new company. That's not grandiose, that's impact. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, the June sun warm on our faces. I saw Gideon at the summit yesterday, I said finally. Samuel's hand tightened briefly on mine. How did that feel? Nothing. That's the strange part, I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just, nothing. I stopped walking, turning to face him. For so long, I thought I was building all of this to prove him wrong. To show him what he lost. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about him at all. When did you realize that? When Kendall Mills sent me that text yesterday. When I sat across from her this morning and saw myself 3 years ago, scared, uncertain, but ready to fight. That's when I realized, this was never about revenge. It was about making sure the next woman doesn't have to fight alone. Samuel smiled. You know what that makes you? What? Free. 3 months later, Ashby Events hosted its 2nd annual Women in Leadership Summit at the Crystal Pavilion. 700 attendees this time, with a wait list of 400. Kendall Mills attended as my guest, having successfully filed her own ethics complaint and secured a new position at a competitor where her work would be properly credited. The keynote speaker was Mara Rudd, who'd written a book about recovering from professional betrayal. Her dedication read, to Meredith Ashby, who taught me that the opposite of being erased isn't being remembered, it's being undeniable. I stood at the back of my ballroom, the same spot where I'd stood 3 years earlier watching my marriage disintegrate, and surveyed the room. 700 women, all building their own empires, all refusing to be erased. The chandeliers I'd chosen because they reminded me of stars now felt like something different. Not stars to wish on, but lights to guide by. Proof that even in the darkest rooms, if you build your own light, others will find their way to you. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I was at your summit today. I've been documenting my manager's credit theft for 6 months, and I'm ready to file a complaint. Could we talk? I smiled and typed back, of course. Coffee next week? The work was never done. There would always be another Gideon, another company where merit lost to politics, another talented person wondering if they were crazy to expect credit for their own work. But there would also be me. And Kendall. And Mara. And Carrie. And an ever-growing network of people who'd learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building something so magnificent that the people who tried to erase you become footnotes in your success story. I looked around my ballroom one more time, then walked toward the exit. Samuel was waiting outside to take me to dinner, our Thursday tradition that had evolved from strategy sessions to something that felt like building a life. The Crystal Pavilion's lights illuminated the Denver night behind me as I walked away from the venue I owned, the business I'd built, the legacy I was creating. 3 years ago, my husband had stood on my stage and thanked another woman for my work. Tonight, 700 women stood on that same stage and thanked themselves for their own. And that, I thought as Samuel took my hand and we walked into the night, was better than any revenge I could have imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.